We are going to continue with our lesson 4.2. And now that we have gone over classical and operant, I just want to reiterate the difference between classical and operant conditioning. So, for classical conditioning is respondent behavior. So, it is going to be an involuntary response. So, we had looked at things like emotions, food aversions, phobias, triggering or retrieval of memory. All of those are involuntary responses. Okay, and here's what happens is that the CS and the UCS are presented and then comes the response. So the stimulus is there and the response follows, okay, which is going to be different than operant conditioning. Now, the example that I really like to use is dogs drooling versus barking. Okay, so a dog is going to, I want you to imagine that you're sitting at the dinner table, okay, and you're eating. Okay, the dog sees the food and starts drooling. Okay, so the food has to be there in order for the response to take place. Okay, so the food, then the drool. Okay, when we compare it to operant, okay, operant is operant behavior. It operates on the environment and it is voluntary. Okay, so we're going to assume in this case that the barking is voluntary. Okay, so they see the food, they bark, and the reason they bark is probably because they were given food as a reinforcer. Okay, so the participant, in this case the dog, has to act in a certain way in order to gain or to avoid a consequence. Okay, so in this case, they're trying to gain that reinforcer of food. So our example is going to be again, you're sitting at the dinner table. Okay, the dog barks, and then you give the dog food. You just positively reinforced that food. Or excuse me, you positively reinforced the barking. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to table this part, okay? And when we meet either on Thursday or Friday, we are going to go over, spend some time really differentiating and just doing some more practice with classical versus operant. What I'd like to do now is actually move on with more discussion on reinforcement. So Skinner really looked at he really looked at reinforcement. So we're going to be looking at types of reinforcers, schedules of reinforcement, etc. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is what do we reinforce with? So we have what are called primary reinforcers. And I don't have a definition listed here, but you're probably going to want to write that definition down. A primary reinforcer is going to be something that satisfies a biological need. And a lot of times I will say it's an unlearned reinforcer. So I don't have to learn that food, that water have value because they satisfy biological needs. So that's what is meant by primary reinforcer. We also have secondary or conditioned reinforcers. So a secondary reinforcer is going to be something that is learned. Okay, my favorite example is money. Okay, like my son is 10 months old right now. He does not understand that money has value. All he would want to do would be chewing on it. Okay, he would just want to chew on it, which is really gross. Ew. But we look at that, we learn that money has value. We learn that grades have value. So those are going to be secondary. And what I'm going to have you do is you're going to emphasize this or learn a little bit more about it by looking at FAST 4.2, Part 3. Okay, the other part that we look at is when are we reinforced? So it's either immediate or it's delayed. Okay, so I do it with the immediately would be right after it happens. So, like, let's say you mow somebody's lawn for money, you're probably going to get paid right after you do it. You babysit, you get paid right after you're done babysitting. Okay, delayed then is going to be that you have to wait for it. So, if we're looking at jobs here, most of our jobs are delayed reinforcers. I get paid every 2 weeks. So if I work Monday, I might not get paid till the following Friday. That would be a delayed reinforcer. So what I'd like you to do at this time, okay, is complete FAST 4.2 and complete part 3. So there's a small reading that will explain the types of reinforcers a little bit more in depth. And then there's a chart that I want you to look at to decide if you think it's primary or secondary, or if it's how it could be immediate and how it could be delayed. And the key is on Schoology. Okay. So the next part then, I'm going to move ahead. Okay, is looking at schedules of reinforcement. So this is really looking at like the how. Okay, how are you reinforced? What does the organism have to do? etc. So with schedules of reinforcement, okay, we do have things that are continuous. Okay, so continuous reinforcement would be every single time you perform the behavior, you would get reinforced. Very few things are continuously reinforced. They're usually partially reinforced. Okay, so partial or intermittent reinforcement. So here's how we're going to discuss this. Okay, is it's either going to be fixed or variable. Okay, so fixed means that it's a set number or it's a set amount, it's steady. So a good example here would be every 2 weeks you get paid. You know that every other week, every 2 weeks, you will get reinforced. Variable is sporadic. You don't know when it's going to happen. Okay, so a good example of this would be like pop quizzes. Okay, if you did a pop quiz, you wouldn't know if it was going to be on Wednesday, if it was going to be on Friday, if it was going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay, it is sporadic. Okay, we also then are going to have ratio versus interval. So ratio is going to be the number of responses from an organism. So that means that the organism actually has to do something. Okay, so if we look at Skinner's operant conditioning, the rat actually has to push the bar in order to get the food. If we're training a dog, the dog actually has to sit in order to get the treat. Okay, so the organism physically has to do something. Where here with interval is time. Okay, so it's less control of the organism and more just about waiting. Okay, so again, if I go back to the working example, okay, you work, you get paid every 2 weeks. You could work 1 hour, you could work 100 hours in that 2 weeks. You still have to wait until every other Friday. Okay, it's dependent on time in comparison to the number of responses. I will try to be really obvious with time that it's like minutes, days, weeks. Okay, but that's not necessarily true for the AP test. So on the FAST assignment, I have some that are really obvious and other ones that you have to think a little bit more. Okay, so let's put these together then. So we will put fixed with ratio, fixed with interval, and then variable with those two as well. So what would be an example of fixed ratio? Okay, the rat has to press a lever 5 times in order to get food. Okay, that would be a really good example of fixed ratio. We also have fixed interval. So here, getting paid every 2 weeks. Okay, it doesn't matter how often you work. Okay, it's still going to be every 2 weeks. We also then have variable ratio, and gambling is the best example here because if you can actually picture somebody like at a poker table, they have to play the hand, they have to make the bet, and it depends on the organism making that bet, doing that behavior. So that's that ratio. And here's why something about gambling, it does produce the strongest behavior. Okay, because what happens here is somebody makes a bet, they're like, oh, this is the one that I'm going to win. No, this is the one I'm going to win. And they never know when they're going to get reinforced. So they're going to continue to do the behavior in hopes of reinforcement. Okay, so variable ratio produces that strongest response. And then variable interval would be an example like waiting for a snowstorm. So it doesn't matter what I do. Okay, so that would be like the ratio. It doesn't matter on the number of responses. It doesn't matter if I wax up my skis and I get all my ski stuff ready. I still am dependent on what day is it going to snow. Okay, I just have to wait for it. Okay, so that's what that interval is. Okay, it doesn't matter what I do. Okay, I just have to wait it out. Okay, based on that time. So let's do a few examples, and this is what you'll do in your FAST assignment. Okay, so a child does chores and gets an allowance every Friday. So you're going to see 5 questions like this on the FAST assignment for part 4. So a child gets reinforced. In this case, is it steady or is it sporadic? Well, it's every Friday, so that's steady. Okay, and then is it based on time or the number of? Well, I was really obvious here with the day. Okay, so this is time, fixed interval then. So the child is on a fixed interval schedule. Okay, the next one, a child mows the lawn and is paid every 3rd time he mows. Okay, so again, is this steady or is this sporadic? Well, this would be steady because it's every 3rd time. If I had said something like might be paid the 3rd time, might be paid the 5th time, okay, that's going to be sporadic. And then here's it based on time or the number of. In this case, it's the number of because he has to mow 3 times. He actually has to mow in order to get that. So this is going to be the child is on a fixed ratio schedule. Okay, And then here is just a chart. You don't have to draw this or anything, but just showing the strength of the responses. And you can see here that the ratio does have a stronger response and it happens more quickly. And that's because the organism is in control of the reinforcement. So here with the variable ratio, they don't know when they will get reinforced. So they may continue to do the behavior because the next one they might get reinforced. Here with the fixed ratio, you can see that it does produce a strong response. It just takes a little bit more time. Okay, in comparison to the variable and fixed interval, okay, it's just again depending on that time. So what I'd like you to do, and this will be due today by 11:59, okay, is to complete parts 3 through 5 and then submit by 11:59 p.m. And I would just do it right now so you can finish that up. Okay, and what we're going to do then is in class tomorrow, we will finish up with lesson 4.3 and just talk about uh, the cognitive and biological and application of learning. The other thing, and this is for everybody, is test retakes, okay, are going to be on Friday. So make sure you get your retake information into me. Okay, have a good day, everybody.